Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me at this great conference on ataxias. And I'm talking to you today and for the IFACTS, on behalf of the IFACTS consortium, especially of Audrey Tanguy, who did the work with Sophie Tesnas-Dumoncel in our group. You heard about her work yesterday because she analyzed the Euroscar and the RISCA data together with Thomas Glockgater. And you can see on this slide that there are a lot of people you know which are part of the IFACTS consortium. Why would we like to have a quantitative score of cerebral dysfunction? Yes, because it's rater independent, and we would like to see if this is useful to use this in clinical trials. So the CCFS, the Composite Cerebellar Functional Score, was born in a little before 2008 when we published the first paper, and you can see in this slide that it evolved quite a bit from a wooden box, which was decorated by my girls at the time, because they were younger, now they're older to do that, and with a click board with Silvio Manto from Brussels, to have two cellular counters and to do clicks in between, but I'll show you how this works. And it evolved to a more sophisticated automated box, so you could do it quicker because we know that it's age dependent, so we needed to adjust it for age. And finally, we have open source box now that everybody can construct on its own, and I'm very happy to announce this and to show you how it works. But why would we have this quantitative tool? Because there are the 9-hole pegboard and other tests are out there, and what we did in 2008 is to take each test with each hand and to decide which is the most sensitive for change. And what we found at the time is that it's the combination of two performance, doing the 9-hole pegboard with your dominant hand and the click with the dominant hand, and the combination of two adjusted on age gives you a score. And this score is related to the disease duration and to the ability of the dysfunction of the functional disability, which was assessed by the UHDRS score at the time. And this score evolves over time in dominant cerebral ataxias, and we were able to show this. I just show you how this works and how fast it is, so I give you a real-time how someone do it. It's one of my research assistants who will do it for you. But when you go on the site of the ICM, together with our living lab, you have the tutorial to construct this. So there's some electronics inside, but it's very small there. But when you click on this last table there, that gives you the links to where you can order the stuff and build it together. So it's quite easy to do. And there's an email from Pierre Tessier who can help you if you don't manage to assemble this thing. But it looks like this, and you saw that she did the pegboard already, and now she will do the click, and then you have the thing, and it takes 5 minutes usually, and then you have your score. The question is how these scores behave over time, because when we used only the 9-hole pegboard, we were not able to pick up the changes we wanted to have in cerebral ataxias in time, which is key when we want to do clinical trials. So we first showed in the dominant ataxias that if you do a CCFS or sera, you pick up the change over time, and you see here that the time interval we used were quite large, 2 years, 3 years. And if you do the sera, you have 1.5 points a year if you take all the cerebral ataxias, and if you break them up into subgroups, they don't evolve exactly the same, neither for the CCFS nor for the sera, but they're evolving like a clinical scale. Not better, but like a clinical scale. So if you look at effect sizes, like for all clinical scales, these effect sizes are quite low, between 0.2 and 0.5 if you take sera or CCFS. And if you look, in this case, in the dominant ataxias, if you look for the sera or for the CCFS, they're about in the same range, but really low. So what was interesting is, for example, in SCAR3, we just heard about it sometimes, and there was one of the person in the audience who asked that young patients have a different clinical phenotype, and CCF can pick this up, because if you take those with Parkinsonism or dystonia and the others without, you don't have the same evolution of the CCFS scale. So even this fast 5-minute scale picked this up. So what we wanted to do then, and what we always do, is to imagine if you use this in a clinical scale, in a clinical trial, how many patients would you need to include? So you can see here the two lines. You have the expected reduction of the natural rate of progression with treatment. Let's say you would expect, if you're really very optimistic, a 0.5 reduction or 50%. You have on the bold line the sera scores, and the dotted lines are the CCFS. So you can note that's the other way around, sera and CCFS, sorry. And if you do this, you would need, as an outcome, if you would take sera only, you would need, for a 50% reduction, not the same number for each genotype. You would need about 60 patients for SCAR2, 70 for SCAR1, and 75 for SCAR3. And the number would be greater for the CCFS, that's for sure. But you would need less stratification, because the sera is dependent on some of the variables like CAG repeat or others. So they behave quite similar. So we wanted to see how this works in Friedreich's ataxia. What do we know for Friedreich's ataxia and the evolution over time? You heard yesterday from the IFAX consortium presentation by Jörg Schulz that you have the evolution of sera over time in all patients in the late onset and the typical ones. And if you look at effect sizes, as he told you yesterday, that the best thing would be if you have a reduction of 50% again, that you do a 2-year trial, but you need to include quite a lot of patients, which will not be feasible if you think about several treatment options that will be out there for Friedreich's ataxia. So we need something else. So what we wanted to see is if in the IFAX consortium, if we compare the CCF scores with the scars, do they behave differently? Does there, like we knew for sera, is there a ceiling effect in the scales? And what is the relationship between groups? So what did we see? We took nearly 400 patients with Friedreich's ataxia, 200 patients with dominant scars, and controls. Their controls were younger, as was the Friedreich's ataxia patients compared to the scars, so there's a clear difference. The age at onset was not the same, but this is expected. And the disease duration was not the same, so we corrected for disease duration afterwards, but you can see that the CCFS is higher, which is expected. But if you create, if you adjust for disease duration, you to create an index for this, you can see that if you adjust the dysfunction you could expect for Friedreich's ataxia is much slower than for scars, meaning that you would, if you use clinical scales, you would need to probably include more patients in these trials than for dominant ataxias. Then how they behave. Yes, you don't have ceilings effect for the CCFS, which is interesting. You have ceilings effects for the sera in the Friedreich's ataxia patients, meaning that only for the middle scores between 10 and 24 of the sera scale, CCFS and sera behave the same. Meaning that in very advanced patients, probably the examination sera, it's an examinator-based examination. It's not quantitative, it's not independent. Probably it changes at the end, and in the very early stages of the disease, the SARA scale do not behave the same way. So probably the two scales assess the dysfunction a little bit differently. CCFS better in the very early stages because the interpretation of the clinician is less prominent perhaps, and they may be very complementary. But they're not exactly superposable, and this is important to remember. So as a first conclusion is that we can measure cerebral dysfunction in Friedreich's ataxia with the scale. It seemed to be slower, but we need to confirm this with really longitudinal data. There we only used an index dividing by disease duration. We confirmed that there's a direct effect, and I didn't show you the data there, of the age at onset and the disease duration for both scales, but they influenced the variance only in a very moderate proportion. So it's the disease duration which is the most important. And as I said to you, now we have the open access for the CCFS board, as I showed you. I would like to finish to say that the small effect sizes and the rare disease we are confronting or we have to put together, we would need probably integration of this data. And as Pierre-Gilles Henry showed us, the very large effect sizes in imaging should be used. So with Arthur Tenenhausen, our group, who is a biostatistician, and Isaac, who just finished his thesis, we tried to do a multi-model integration with analysis which used the different parameters we want to include or assess in the patient: metabolic data, MRS data, volumetric data, or clinical data, if it's the CCFS or the SARA, and to do block analysis and to see what drives, what are the sensitive variables you can pick out. And in the first paper they published this year, it showed that probably it's the volumetry of the pons who drives the other factors very well. So I think there is some integration we should do to be able to pick out the variables we should look at when we do a clinical trial. So just to show you that the rate of the atrophy of the pons volume, for example, here in SCARS, not in Friedreich's ataxia, is very clearly different from the controls, and we will be able to use this in trials. And yesterday we heard from Thomas, he said that it's more difficult to put people in the scanner for volume. It's not 1 hour, you can do it very fast, and the reproducibility from one scanner to the other is quite good. So if you look at other parameters, I don't give you all the details about, but if you just look at the effect sizes here from very small, like the clinical scales, 0.2, which is what is CCFS about or what is SARA about. And if you look at diffusion imaging, for example, with very large, huge effect sizes, you understand that we need to integrate this data, I think, in the different studies we want to do, because only with the clinical scales we will not go very far. And we need something which is fast. And this is my conclusion. I think that the effect sizes of the imaging parameters are really so much higher than what we will ever achieve with the clinical assessment. And that's why we need the combination of the imaging with the clinical, with the fast clinical rate-independent measure, with wet biomarkers, which are really warranted. And we could imagine neurofilament, for example, to pick out the very severe evolving cases, and combine this with the imaging data. And for example, for Friedreich's ataxia, we need some cardiac outcomes also to be included. And this integration is perhaps the most efficient. We will have to run the trials in an efficient way with a small number of patients. So I would like to thank the IFAX consortium, where a lot of people are here, and I cited them in the beginning of my talk. The Center of Reference for Rare Diseases in our group, and the group of Alexis Price, where we do the imaging stuff at the ICM in Paris. So thank you very much for your attention.
Nice talk, Alessandra. So where do I get a CCFS?
What do you want to do?
Where do I get one of the CCFS boxes?
You'd have to construct them on your own. You want to see the
Do I need a
tutorial?
power tool? Can you do it
Yeah.
in front of us?
No, you can. It's very cheap because you can buy the stuff on the internet. I give you the Amazon address. That's all on the little
But I
table.
have Amazon Prime to get one.
You can do whatever you want, and you can go away with it.
So just send me the links, and we'll
The links, we sent it yesterday out to all the SPATAX members. I sent it out to you personally. Click on it, go ahead, and have fun, because it's really fun, easy.
You should see what I did.
Thanks, Alessandra, for a nice talk. Do you think that what you are measuring might be the aftermath of the sensory ganglionopathy rather than necessarily cerebellar function? And if there is a treatment that might be effective, that may be more effective in, say, cerebellar functioning rather than necessarily ganglionopathy, which the recovery of the sensory damage might not be all that good. Would that be a problem?
I think the dysmetria and the speed, actually, because this is what we're assessing, is a combination of what we have from the cerebellum and the ganglion roots. So I think it's not only this, because in the other diseases, in the other ataxia, we see exactly the same evolution over time, and we assess the cerebellar attacks. If we would have a treatment which was only target dysarthria, for example, would CCFS reflect this? Probably, yeah, because the cerebellum is not only, you don't have one spot that gives you only dysarthria. I don't think that's a real problem. It's a proxy anyway, and you see the small effect sizes. It's a clinical scale, which I think reflects the ability to do something fast. You need for this not only the cerebellum, you need also your cortex and a lot of other stuff. So it's not specific. It gives you the proxy to this. Well,
I have a question. Here.
where are you?
Here.
Are you? My chairman. My chairman. Chairman, yes, chairman.
So the question is a little broader. So I see from your talk and previous talks, it seems that the time course of these changes is actually quite slow. So
yes.
The changes are very nice that they're objective, right? So now you have objective imaging parameters, or this type of measurements you're doing, but it's over a period of 24 months to 36 months that you really see changes. So how does that apply to clinical trials that are running nowadays that I think are 6 months to 12 months? Is that a problem?
I completely agree. And I was even more puzzled when I saw the data from the IFAX consortium that the CCF is even picking up a slower evolution than what we see in the scars, which meaning that you would have even need more patients. And Jörg showed you yesterday the best fit would be 2 years. Nobody wants to do 2 years of a trial, and the patient won't stick in a 2-year trial. So the only parameters which have effect sizes which are feasible for 6 months, as was shown in Huntington's disease, for example, are the imaging ones. So you need to combine that.
I see the point, but now increasing the number of patients will improve your p-value, but the size of the effect remains small.
Yeah. Yeah, but at the end you want to decide if it worked or not, you see? That's the point is there. It's a slow evolving disease. Probably we need to identify those where the evolution is a bit faster. So we know that we will see something faster. So as I said, for neurofilament or frataxin levels or other levels, we could wet markers and then combine those. But to pick up only the fast ones, if you have a treatment that work only on the fast evolution and not of those which are the evolution is slower, is this what you want? It's difficult to decide how to do it exactly. Thank you.